Good evening. This is a meeting of the Ordinance Committee of the City Council. I recognize a quorum. I have to my far right Councilor Jeff Thompson. To my immediate right, I have Councilor Susan DeCastro. To my left, I have Councilor Jack Lally, and Councilor-at-Large David Texera is not here this evening. He is recovering from surgery, and he's not able to make it. So you're stuck with the four of us for tonight, and please forgive me my voice. Forgive my voice. Everybody in the family has gone down for the count, so it is what it is. Madam Clerk, would you proceed to item number 1, please?
Number 1, ordinance. An ordinance to adopt a new section of the zoning ordinance to establish the MBTA Communities Multifamily Overlay District to allow multifamily housing as a right in accordance with Section 3A of the Zoning Act, Massachusetts General Laws, Chapter 40A. Invited to attend, Jeffrey Thompson, Ward 5 Councilor, Rob May, Director of Economic Planning and Development.
All right, Mr. May and Councilor Thompson, if you want to remain up here, it's fine, or if you want to go down with Mr. May. Just for the benefit of the public, this is a zoning ordinance which is properly before us because of legislation passed by the state legislature requiring communities to adopt zoning within a certain distance of your MBTA rail lines. So this is really initiated because of the action by the state legislature. And with that, I'll turn it over to Mr. May.
Good evening, councilors. I am happy to be here this evening to go through a brief presentation before you and be able to answer some of your questions. For the record, I'm Rob May, Director of Planning and Economic Development. I'm joined here by Evan Sears from my office, also Emily Ennis and Paula Ramos-Martinez from Ennis & Associates, who are the consulting firm that helped us draft both the form-based code and the stopgap overlay district, which we're here to discuss right now. We want to talk about the process that we've gone through to date, the timeline that's been involved. We'll talk a little bit about the form-based code and why it was introduced, and then we'll come back to talk about the overlay district as what we're calling a stopgap or a Band-Aid approach to where we are at the moment. We do want to acknowledge some of the partners that we've had with us, including Mass Development and Mass Housing and Mass Housing Partnership. They've been funding some of the work that we've been doing in our communities. Mass Housing is also funding currently the Montello plan that is going on right now on the north side of the city. So in 2002, and I'm on page 4, 2002, the Commonwealth passed the MBTA Communities Act, which is referred to as MBTA 3A colloquially. It provides for a minimum zoning requirements for multifamily housing. There's some other requirements about it needs to be a certain size. It needs to be
certain geography.
Thank you. Certain geography and contiguous with itself, close to the train stations or MBTA facilities. And it had a requirement that communities like ours, which are considered commuter rail communities, need to be in compliance before December 31st, 2024, which is rapidly approaching. Now, what happens if we're not in compliance? There's just certain state grants that we will not be able to apply for or receive. It's not the end of the world. We are working with you towards this, and we think that we'll be in compliance shortly after the first of the year, based on the calendar that we'll adopt here. As you know, 2022 was a long time ago. We prepared a compliance timeline and plan with the Commonwealth that they have approved, and we set out to begin bringing ourselves into compliance. And so we've hired Ennis & Associates, and we began a series of community meetings to help develop at that point, it was the form-based code, to take the master plans, the community developed plans that we have in downtown in the Trout Brook area, bring them into a form of zoning that will help implement that. You can see on these timelines, the city started its planning process really back in 2015, where we created the Downtown Urban Renewal Plan. It runs through the Downtown Action Plan, 2019 and 2022, or 2021. We're working in the Trout Brook area, which is the area around the CSX yards. We received some additional funding in 2022, where we begin some zoning and studies up in the Lovett Brook area, which is the area that's around Good Samaritan Hospital. 2024, we were blessed to receive some funding from the Commonwealth to prepare the Campello neighborhood plan, which was a year-long planning process and has been brought before, adopted by the planning board, and is due to be introduced to City Council with Councilor Nicastro's assistance. And we were also awarded some funding to now start the Montello master planning process, which we're in the middle of, and we should be done by the end of 2025. And we should also have a Lovett Brook urban renewal plan at the end of 2025. And so what we're proposing, or have proposed, is a series of zoning steps, zoning amendments that will help bring forth these master plans and bring us into compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. Do you want to talk a little bit about the briefly high line of the public process for the form-based code?
Absolutely, thank you. Councilors, good evening. For the record, Emily Innes of Innes Associates. It's delighted to be in this room with you again. So the key public meetings that have happened for this form-based code, as Rob May mentioned, all of these planning processes, zoning is an implementation component of the form-based code. And so taking the public meetings that were part of that process, zoning was discussed as each of those. But during this past year and a half or so, we have been working specifically on meetings for the form-based code. So that would include the downtown Trout Brook meetings that happened last spring and summer into fall in 2023, at the same time that Campello planning was going on. This year, we have had 2 citywide workshops specific to the form-based code, one in June and one in September. In addition, we'd started the planning, next round of planning processes for both Lovett Brook and for Montello. The form-based code and zoning changes have been the subject of all of those discussions. In addition to the public meetings, each of these processes have had steering committee meetings with people who have deep familiarity with the neighborhood areas. So this has been an ongoing multi-year process, not just of the original plans, but also specific to the form-based code.
So you'll see on page 9 of the presentation, these are the codes that we had been proposing for downtown Trout Brook and the Campello neighborhoods. They would, if they were adopted, would bring us into compliance with the MBTA Communities Act. We go into a little bit more timeline, but you can see that, you know, we've introduced an ordinance to City Council. The chair of the Ordinance Committee has requested that we bring on a consultant and some legal representation to help digest this 300-page document. It's a beast, and writing ordinance isn't easy, and it took us longer than we anticipated, so it got to you a little bit later. There were some formatting issues, but we've gotten through it, and it's in front of you. However, with the extensive review that the council wants to do, and rightfully wants to do, we are not going to make the December 31st deadline. So we quickly shifted gears to develop this MBTA overlay district that is the discussion of this evening's event, or of this evening's meeting. The zoning overlay takes into consideration large portions of what was discussed in the form-based code district, but it does not include areas that were strictly commercial, as with the downtown and the southern Main Street corridor. So it hugs the area around the MBTA tracks, the MBTA stations. It's a lot less robust as the form-based code is. It is enough to get us certified and in compliance. It's not all the bells and whistles that the community wanted and that the developers want and landowners want. It doesn't have the land use regulations and building standards that the form-based code has, but it gets us to the requirements that MBTA has. And so you can see, as comparing the different maps, where the overlay districts would be as compared to where the form-based code would be. Again, they parallel the tracks and include large sections of downtown and the area around the the Campello commuter rail station in Ward 4. For the most part, the MBTA form-based code that you have, or the MCMOD overlay district stopgap, is divided up into several sections that deal with the purpose, the establishment, and the applicability. There's a series of definitions. There's a series of permitted uses, and in this case, the permitted uses are multifamily housing and mixed-use housing. Mixed use usually means commercial, ground floor commercial activity. We deal with dimensional standards, parking requirements. There's some general development standards. There's an affordability requirement of 10%. And we require that, we're asking that this go through a site plan review process like other large projects do through the planning board. Any variances would have to come from the Zoning Board of Appeals. And the last section is about severability. As you look at how the two ordinances really line up against each other, there are a lot more uses that are allowed in form-based code. In the overlay district, we only talk about multifamily and mixed-use buildings. The lot size in form-based code varies depending on the building style. And in this case, in the overlay district, we're looking at a 5,000 square foot lot as the minimum lot. Maximum height in the overlay district is 3 feet. The minimum amount of open space is 25 feet. It's not as extensive as it is in the form-based code, but it's sufficient to get us in compliance. The maximum building area, building coverage is at 50%, and that's a little more generous than the form-based code is. And then there's not as many development standards and criteria that are established in the form-based code. Again, it's to give us some flexibility, and what we're trying to do is get across that finish line and then come back with the form-based code at your discretion, which has a lot more more detailed requirement that provides certainty to the neighbors so that they know what they're getting on their property and adjacent properties. It also provides greater flexibility to developers. And so we think that the form-based code will be the code that we end up with. But in the meantime, we're hoping that we can pass this overlay district to get us, again, across the finish line.
These are just examples.
Do you want to
Mr. May, before I turn it over to Councilor Thompson, for the benefit of people who follow these meetings, frame what we're doing in an easy-to-understand couple of sentences. What is the legislature asking all of us who are in these different cities and towns
Yes, sir.
with MBTA access to do, and what is the philosophy behind it? Because otherwise, for most people, zoning is probably the least thing you want to think about is in your lifetime, so, but go ahead.
Counselor, if I may, I will answer that. And you're absolutely right. Conversations around zoning are not easy to have, in part because the context and the concepts are not something that people run into every day. So the MBTA Communities Act, which is now Section 3A of Chapter 40A of the Massachusetts General Laws, so it is a law, requires that communities that are designated as MBTA communities under Massachusetts law zone for multifamily as of right in at least one district in that community. The requirements of the compliance guidelines specify a certain geographic area, a certain that is dependent on the type of community you are. In this case, Brockton is a commuter rail community. It requires a certain number of housing units as a unit capacity, and that is dependent on your 2020 housing stock as determined by the U.S. Census. Unit capacity does not mean a building target. It does not mean that the city has to produce these units. It's a way of measuring whether or not the district that is created meets the other requirements of the law, which is that it needs to be of an appropriate size for a neighborhood. And so the combination, the geography and the unit capacity is what helps you determine whether or not it's that reasonable size. The multifamily housing has to be suitable for families, so you can't have restrictions based on age or other criteria, and you have to meet a minimum density of 15 dwelling units per acre. For a city like Brockton, much of the sort of denser parts of the community are already going to meet that anyway. For other communities, that's been a little bit of a harder thing to wrap their heads around. So after the law was passed, the Executive Office of Housing and Livable Communities developed what they called compliance guidelines, and they're allowed to do so under the regulations. It specifically mentions that, and it's how each of the 177 cities and towns can prove that they're compliant. And these compliance guidelines are a written document, and it requires that the community, once it's passed the zoning, has to demonstrate through the use of an compliance model, which is an Excel and GIS-based workbook that proves that you've met those requirements, that unit capacity, that density, and that geographic area. So as we've been assisting the city with the development of the form-based code and then the review of this stopgap zoning, we've also been testing it with the compliance model according to your requirements. So we know that at every stage, with the changes that were made through it, that the city is still compliant. And we've got some suggestions for language change on this 3A zoning that will keep you in compliance when we get to that point. But the real key, the thing that the state is asking you to do, is to create that zoning for multifamily as of right, which means it needs a building permit. It can go through site review, and we're recommending that it go through site review, but that it meets those guidelines, and that's why we're here specifically today. As Rob May said, when we come back to you for the form-based code, that will also be compliant, but for today, we're focused on that stopgap zoning.
The whole MBTA Communities Act grew out of the fact that Eastern Massachusetts is woefully short on housing units, and the lack of units is raising prices. It's pushing people out of their communities. Mm-hmm. It's making the areas unlivable. And what's really behind that is a lot of local exclusive zoning, where we require large lots, large setbacks, base parking on the number of bedrooms. And in some areas of Massachusetts, that does make sense. But areas that are served by transit, and in our case, it's the MBTA commuter rail, and it's the BAT regional service that we have here. We should be able to step up to the plate and provide additional housing units to absorb some of that demand in the area. And the Commonwealth thought that it's not fair for one community to have to absorb this, and so they've come up with a very formulaic method of being able to spread that, some people would say burden, but I think it's benefit across eastern Massachusetts in the 170-some communities that are MBTA communities. And so if we each pick up an amount, we'll be able to absorb the population within that is here. They'll allow our seniors to stay in the community, to provide homes for our children as they graduate out of and return home from college, provide space for people who want to downsize, but also have homes for up and coming families. So it looks at a mix of housing opportunities. It doesn't exclude any one particular kind. It doesn't favor multifamily over single family. It's really a broad brush approach and a very evenly distributed method of tackling the housing crisis that we have here in the Commonwealth.
Councilor Thompson, you introduced this, so you're up.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, Mr. Mayor, Ms. Enos. So obviously there's a December 31st, 2024 deadline. What happens if the city does not meet that deadline?
There are no guns that are going to be fired at the city. We're not going to be shelled. What we anticipate in our conversations with the Commonwealth is that there are some grants that have been awarded to the city that we're not able to execute until we are in compliance.
And
so, for example, the grant that was awarded yesterday to the Downtown Brockton Association, we will not be able to execute that grant agreement until the city is in compliance.
are there any other pending grants that we'd be unable to access until we comply?
Yes, there is a grant currently for the Thatcher Street Convent Development Project. There's a grant at Trout Brook, the CSX yards. There is, I don't think it affects the two, it doesn't affect the two residential developments that are downtown that received awards, but it's basically these other larger grants that we need to be in compliance with.
Now,
It does not affect anything on the transportation side, any infrastructure funding. It's just these, voluntary is not the right word.
Discretionary.
Discretionary, thank you. Grants, opportunities.
Understood. You say this is essentially a stopgap measure until we can fully vet the form-based code ordinance. But we would be establishing an overlay that would have buildings be able to be built by right on this land. So are there, in your understanding, are there any current developers looking to develop under this specific overlay? Or would, or are we actually just trying to have it effectively a stopgap where we would delay any sort of building until the form-based code is in effect?
And I wouldn't say that the stopgap overlay district is delaying building, but it would allow development to go forward. There are no developers that I'm working with right now that want, pass the ordinance. They're much more interested in the form-based code. The large projects like Ted Carmen and other projects that you see that are much larger would certainly benefit from the form-based code, but would not be stopped by the overlay.
Okay, because just my concern would be if we're putting one overlay in effect that we're saying is not necessarily ideal for what Brockton's trying to accomplish in these areas. So but we're giving builders the right to build. So if some builder comes in with maybe a development that we believe maybe is not, ideal, and that they should probably take advantage of the more options available under the form-based, I just want to try to calculate or quantify the concern that if we allow this to move forward, we don't have people coming in building projects that we may find not ideal until the form-based code is passed.
The difference between...
I mean, there's nothing we could do to
I
stop
think
that, essentially.
There is not a lot of daylight between the two of them. It's the level of specificity that the form-based code has, the flexibility in the number of uses, how the sites are developed, what kinds of bonuses or benefits that come to the community. They're not as great as they are in form-based code as they are as what's laid out currently in the overlay district. It's, I can use a sports analogy. It gets us to bronze, but I want the gold. And so there's enough upside, both for the residents and the developers and the property owners, that we should come back and finish that job. And our intention is that when form-based code is passed, this overlay district would dissolve.
Right, so with that, because this is an overlay, and essentially the form-based code would be the base
Would be a
code?
new base code.
Okay, new base code, all right. And that would essentially get rid of the overlay?
Yes.
Okay. I mean, I appreciate the work done on this. I know we've been super focused on form-based code, and I know that's an ordinance that we're going to take our time and due diligence and make sure that we properly vet it. We're kind of under the gun. We need to get something in place. I believe this is an appropriate stopgap between now and when we can fully vet out the form-based code. There are some grants that are pending that we'd not be able to access until the form-based code, well, unless this is approved. And so, you know, we want to make sure business in Brockton is getting done. So I'm favorable to this ordinance. I really am looking forward to getting to the discussion of the form-based code, because that's not only going to have benefits or effects of these areas, but potentially in other areas of our city. And so I know, Mr. Chair, you want to bring in some consultants. I'm hoping that process is moving forward as quickly as possible, because that's, it's important to begin to address the form-based code and bring those discussions before this committee. But at this point, I support the stopgap, and I appreciate your time tonight.
If I may, sir, there are two pieces, two small edits that we're hoping that can be accepted as floor amendments that we've discussed. The first is, after our conversations with the Commonwealth, and this overlay district is the Commonwealth's template, and just tweaked a little bit to serve Brockton, and we over-tweaked. And if we can remove the maximum residential density of 15 units per acre.
Could you just reference the section on our document?
And that is subsection E in the ordinance, and I'm on page 22 of the slides.
Did you provide this to our legislative council?
I did. We're still working on the actual formatting for your review.
Okay.
I'm sorry, so subsection E and,
Yep. Subsection E
In the second table,
in the second table. So subsection E is the dimensional standards, and it is in the table, second table. And the request is to remove the section that says maximum residential density, 15 units per acre.
Do you want anything in its place, or just strike it and?
No, just strike
Striking
it.
it.
Yeah.
so you want
It's under standard, and it's the top first of the second tables, first line of the second tables.
so
and then-
strike that?
yes, sir.
Yes, please.
Someone wants to make the motion, I can write it in.
And Councilor Thompson, you have the floor, but just give me the reason why the Commonwealth wants that stricken.
It affects the compliance model. If you remember, I mentioned there was a geographic GIS and Excel-based model. That particular requirement puts a restriction on it. That means that you would be out of compliance. It's a dimensional requirement. So as Rob said, it was just an overtweak too far. When we ran it through the model, it didn't work.
All right, is there a motion to strike?
So moved.
Well, should we go through the whole thing?
Yeah,
before
let's,
we make
and then we can
changes?
amend the whole thing at once, right?
Do you
Right.
need separate votes, or can you do it on masse? Yeah.
From what I understand, they were only going to propose 2.
Correct.
So it'd be helpful if we just did those 2, and then if there were additional ones.
Okay, all right, then let's go on
Withdraw
to the
my
next
motion.
one.
And then coming out of the planning board's public meeting and public hearing earlier this week, the planning board felt that the side yard requirements in that same table, dimensional standards, should be rewritten so that the total side yard setback, or the side yard setback should be 10 feet on both sides, as opposed to the corner lot having 5 feet and the interior lot having, being not applied. So we're asking that the words corner, foot, 5 feet, interior, foot, not applied, NA, be struck, and the, where it says side yard setback, adding the language 10 feet
Minimum.
minimum.
With no preface as to corner or interior, just straight
Correct.
5 feet, or 10 feet, you said?
10 feet.
There's large sections of the city that are already platted at 50-foot lots, and we want to make sure that we get a decent size. And when you look at the triple deckers and some of the homes that are already in the heart of the city, you're mostly at a 10-foot setback to begin with now, so.
Understood.
It's within the built environment.
I'd make a motion to strike maximum residential density, 15 units per acre. I'd also further make that motion to include striking corner feet, 5 feet, interior feet, NA, and in its place, put side yard setback 10 feet.
Minimum, 10 feet minimum.
10 feet minimum.
Second.
All right, there's a motion to make those 2 amendments. Is there any further discussion? All right, no further discussion. All in favor? All opposed? It is a vote. Just a quick technical question. That would mean that in 2 contiguous lots, you could have a building 10 feet from one sideline and 10 feet from another. There'd only be
Total 20 feet.
Only 20 feet between buildings.
Yes.
And I see the fire chief here and a retired fire chief. That always worries me, that with density of housing and fire safety, but if that's what's required, the legislature has spoken. Anything further from the ordinance committee members on this issue?
Then I'd make a motion to recommend, I didn't know. Okay, you didn't say anything.
Comments,
Okay,
that's, we're always getting there.
okay, sorry.
Thank you. May I speak?
Yes.
Great. Good evening. Thank you for being here. Okay, well, I have comments on the text. And the first is on the second page. D, permitted uses. Down, number 2, use permitted by special permit. And A is renewable energy installations as defined in section 1E3. But I don't really see a definition.
Go back to the definition of.
Yeah. 1E3. It says.
Solar panels.
What else is solar panels?
exceptions.
Oh,
I don't know.
it's, read this.
E13.
It's missing.
That was in the state's language, and we just took it at verbatim.
No, the state's language had, this is what it was meant to be. this heights and setbacks for renewable, oh.
And that's
I know what
repeated.
happened. This, okay, I see what happened. Counselor, thank you for bringing that up. So if you look on after E and the dimensional standards, and then there's 3 numbers after the last table of dimensional standards. For some reason, my copy it does not have page numbers on it. You'll see 4 exceptions, renewable energy installations, and then you said the height and setbacks in section 1E period. Thank you, Microsoft Word read that as it should be a paragraph and then 5 dimensional standards. That 5 should be stricken. It's supposed to be section 1E dimensional standards to accommodate the installation of solar voltaic. So what happened is the 1E has the wrong reference. It's supposed to be E1, so it should read section E1 dimensional standards which is the height restrictions you just saw on the table, to accommodate the installation of solar voltaic, solar thermal, et cetera.
All right, so that change needs to go in the table of dimensional standards 4 and 5, or on the second page, the one I just brought up?
So that change needs to happen in that one, and then when we go to the one that you just brought up, it should be renewable energy installations as defined in section E1.4.
1.4.
Somehow between the versions, the references got mixed up.
Okay, so that's on the second page, and then let's go back to the third page under the tables. So I thought that number 4, exceptions, renewable energy installations, that 5 should be part of it.
Yes, that's correct.
So it would be like a 4 and then a little I?
It would be 4, and you just read all the way through to where it says height and setbacks in section E1E now, and then it has a period and then 5. That should be height and setbacks in section E1, strike the period, strike the 5. So it reads as height and setbacks in section E1 dimensional standards. And then that whole rest of the paragraph is included as it is now. It's just a paragraph return that
Shouldn't be there.
that should not be there. And then, as I said, the wrong reference got mixed up.
Councilor Resnick, did you get that?
I got it, yep.
Okay, thanks. I didn't quite, but close enough. Okay, and then on the third page, under the table of dimensional standards, in the third box marked standard, minimum frontage, new list 30 feet. And I know the state minimum is 20. I personally think 30 feet is too small. I would prefer 50 feet.
50.
Yes.
It's a very good.
What are your thoughts on that?
It would not affect the compliance model, so I'm fine with that.
Okay.
Can you show me where you are?
In E,
If you don't mind.
Standard 30 feet becomes 50.
Yes.
Okay.
and what I did was I pulled our existing zoning and I went to the tables and compared the two. And I was looking at the box for R4s. Okay? And so just making continual comparisons in the setbacks. Wow, is it me or is it really hot in here?
Warm in here.
Yeah. I think we have you on the hot seat, or at least I am. So that's the kind of thing I was comparing. What are the differences? And, you know, how much smaller can we go, but yet not too small? Because as I
a
said
good point.
before the meeting started, we're in a well-settled area of the city around the tracks for most part.
Yeah, and as I mentioned earlier, a lot of this area is already platted. The lots already exist at 50-foot lots. So
That's right.
that would make sense to just make them conforming.
That's right. As much as we can. Okay, in that same box, a couple of lines down, I think it's the minimum to maximum, you showed 10 to 15. In an R4, it's not a minimum, it's just 20.
So the reason we did that is for flexibility for what's existing now. So often you find that front yard setbacks, which are really important for how people view the street, will vary from what's in the zoning. And so we wanted to give the flexibility that someone could match what's on either side by having that range of 0 to 15. Also because this does allow mixed use as of right, and typically you may want to mixed use building closer to the lot line. That 0 to 15 gives that opportunity.
So front yard setback, 20 is too much? 10 to 15 is better? It's just awfully close to the street. I'm concerned about, safety and sidewalks.
Understood. And this is actually, these dimensional standards are probably some of the biggest differences with how the form-based code is written, because the form-based code is giving you more flexibility. So this is a little bit of an attempt to give at least some of the flexibility of the code within this. From a standard 5,000 square foot lot, that's say a 50 by 100, I would not have an objection to a 20-foot setback in this zoning. If you feel more if you, the counselors, feel more comfortable with that. As I said, the 10 to 15 was more to give that flexibility of matching what's on either side.
I do want to bring up, though, that by pushing the building back,
Yes.
we're losing backyard. And
Exactly.
more people are active in their backyards than they are in their front yards. So
And that was the next topic I'm coming up with, rear
Right.
yard.
So I'd say the two are linked, and I was wondering if you were going to talk about rear setbacks
Sure.
as well.
Sure. I still think a 10-foot setback is very small, excessively small.
You could also make it a 15-foot setback for the purposes of the zoning, split the difference. So, again, you won't get the level of flexibility with this that you would where we can do the diagrams in the form-based code and show what we're talking about. But somewhere in that 10 to 20, I think, would be
not
perfectly
unreasonable.
acceptable.
Not
Yeah.
unreasonable.
Yes.
So match both, 15, 15? Or
Talking about the rear yard setback, I haven't made a decision yet on the front yard setback. In an R4, it's 20, and you're showing 0 to 10. Now, again, 0, I mean, especially if we're doing residential, that's very tight. That's, I don't think I can go along with that. Could we do 15 for both? Is that realistic or not terribly unrealistic?
I
That'd
think
be
that would,
reasonable. Yeah, if you think
I
it's
think it's
for
very
both.
reasonable, yes.
Okay, so that's less than an R4, but not much less.
Exactly.
Okay,
And again, it matches the built environment.
right.
So just to clarify, you would strike the min to max foot, 10 foot to 15 foot for the front yard, and make it a minimum of 15, and then essentially do the same for the rear yard setback. You would strike min to max foot, 0 foot to 10, and make it a min of 15.
Yes.
Great.
Did you get that, Attorney Resnick?
I did.
Okay, good. All right, and we're going to rework underneath there.
That'll give kids a place to play, too.
Yeah,
You can't just shrink you gotta have some place for people.
that's right, that's right. Well, it goes on about that under F6, shared outdoor space. And this is on the 5th page. And so, in your draft, you're showing 20, a minimum, have in common a minimum of 24 square foot per unit of outdoor space. Now, if we had 30 units in a building, that's only 600 square feet for the whole building of common open space. Doesn't that seem thin to you?
F for me is
That is in
off-street
addition
parking.
to the open space requirement. There's a minimum percentage.
But that's kind of loosey-goosey. Yes, I have that noted here. Where is that?
So you have a maximum building coverage. This is under E again, the table of dimensional standards. You have a maximum building coverage of 50%.
Yes.
And a minimum open space coverage of 25%. So the minimum open space is that 25% is all open space. The shared outdoor space is a subset of that larger 25%.
So is it it's part of that 25%?
Yeah.
And we're looking at 24, is it 24, 27? 24 square feet as being close to a 6
by 4 balcony, but that would be putting it together to make like a shared terrace or a shared gathering space. Basically, you're looking for the gathering space.
Right. As you see, there's a lot of new development going up in downtown and other places where there's no public outdoor, private open space for residents to get out and stretch. And we wanted to make sure that there was some space available for people, whether that was individual balconies, terraces, patios, or you could accumulate all this space into one larger patio that's shared by everyone, but that there's at least some place that you can go outside and breathe and not just be in the middle of a parking lot.
For example, somebody could come forward and say, look, I've done my 25% open space. Look, there's a strip of land here on this side. There's a strip of land here. There's a strip of land in the back. There's my 25% and I'm good. But that doesn't add the amenity of accessible outdoor space on a unit-by-unit base or combined together. So this stands on top of that requirement and says, hey, some of your open space needs to be usable for the residents. It can't just be strips of landscaping on either side of the lot.
Is it enough?
For the balcony size, I think we were going with that 6 by 4 sort of minimum residential balcony. I mean, market forces might demand more. For combining it together, the 30 by 24 that you mentioned earlier, 24 square feet for 30 units, if you were combining it as a full amount. I guess the question would become whether or not that was enough based on where it was. I think, too, that your 30-unit building is going to be on a larger lot, right? So they're going to have a higher amount of total open space. And this is, again, just that minimum required set.
Yeah, and I was going to say this is so much better than what we currently require as usable open space, because there is no definition of use, requirement for
that's right.
usable open space.
Mm-hmm. Right. We just have a percentage, right?
So it could be a little, square foot here, square foot there.
Okay, I'll continue thinking about that one. And in the same area, number 8, buildings, infill lots. I had to read this a few times to know what an infill building is, or an infill lot. Is it possible to make that a definition in the front of the document?
Yes, we can.
Yeah.
And how would,
Just for everybody's edification right now, that's a vacant lot that's, has development on either side of it. So what we would normally call an abutters lot, in this case, it would become a buildable facility. But we'll write a definition for it and submit it to you.
Don't you think?
That's a great idea. We need to fix that 1E back to E1.
In that same paragraph, we're just pointing out that the section 1E should actually be E1.
I think Word had a hissy fit.
Okay. And so, and then the last sentence in that number 8 is, otherwise, infill buildings may match the setback line of either adjacent building or an average of the setback of the two buildings. You would say may, or you would say will or shall? Or can you not say that, depending upon where the two buildings are?
So may gives the option, shall, of course, is the requirement, and it's what you normally see in zoning, but right now we're saying that you can either, if you have a building on either side, say one is set back 10 feet from the lot line and one is set back 20, your infill can match the 10-foot setback, the 20-foot setback, or it could be halfway between the two at a 15-foot setback. It's kind of where we were talking before with giving some variation in the setback distance. But the reason for doing that is so that there's a relationship between the new building and the existing buildings. And so the word may is giving them the option to propose which relationship they're going to follow, the one on the right, the one on the left, or halfway between the two.
It would be one or the other?
Mhm.
Yes, okay. And then in number 9, A, surface parking. Explain that to me. I'm having some issue with the second sentence of it.
So parking shall not be located in the setback between the building and any lot line adjacent to the front, to the public right-of-way. It should be, I think, so we've just said that parking shall be located to the rear or the side of the principal building. I think what's missing is there's a word, parking shall not be located in the front setback between the building and any lot line adjacent to the public right-of-way. And what we're trying to say is you can't have parking between the principal
Front.
facade and the street, so front is missing.
So we should insert front?
Yes, please.
Okay, that's what I'm... Okay, so then we go to the top of the 6th page. This is section 9C. And your last sentence is parked vehicles may not be visible from the public way.
Hang on, I think I've jumped too far.
9C.
There it is. Sorry, I did jump too far. In parking structures, yes. So the idea is that there is some sort of screening on the parking structure, so you're not looking in and seeing the parked cars.
Okay, and in the line above, you have a strikeout.
Incorporation in the design and placement. It was a strikeout of 2. The word that should have been there is of.
Okay.
So.
And then in H, the affordability requirements, number 4. So it would be at least 10% of all the units must be affordable.
Yes.
Above 10 units, yes.
What?
Above 10 units, yes.
That's right. And the definition of affordable is in the front,
Correct.
right? Okay. And the planning board has responsibility for site plan review, but if a special permit is being required, not a variance, doesn't mention variance, it mentions special permit, that's the purview of the zoning board of appeals.
Is there anything under special permit? I didn't think there was.
It's the energy efficient.
Oh, is the energy efficient?
Yeah. The energy installations, yes, that's sorry, we were conferring which was the special permit. The only special permit should be the energy efficient installations. That's the only use that requires, the renewable energy installations, that's the only use that requires the special permit. And we defined the special permit granting authority under definitions, number 18, as the Brockton Planning Board for the purposes of this zoning, which would only be those renewable energy installations. So they could, in theory, do that as part of the site plan review process.
Right. Right.
Didn't we change that?
We changed that?
We say we wanted zoning to do the special permits, not planning board.
Do we want it for both?
But you'd want some consistency, wouldn't you?
Still allow for the streamlining of the permitting.
We're talking about should the zoning board of appeals do both? Because right now, planning board does do site plan review.
Planning board does do site plan review, and that's how it's so set up in the sample zoning as well. The reason for having the planning board do the special permit under this zoning solely for the renewable energy installations is just for streamlining the permitting process. It means that the applicant doesn't have to go to more than one board for what is mostly an as-of-right use. And the renewable energy installations would be accessory to the building because the special permit is waiving the height to allow for them. So it would be that height would be part of the site plan review process.
Yes, it's-
Okay?
Yeah.
Okay.
Streamline it. Streamline it.
Okay. On the state website, in the area dedicated to this MBTA community's zoning requirements, talks about submission statuses. And Brockton has one, and Mr. May mentioned earlier, where's the language? Evenly distributed responsibility to add this housing. But isn't it so that because we have 3 MBTA stations, perhaps we're getting hit harder than other communities, most other communities that don't have 3 MBTA stations? And don't we already have an awful lot of multifamily units and housing? We've added so much housing already. I'm just always concerned about degree. Like how much does Brockton have to shoulder of the state's shortage of housing when we've already been going along adding so much housing?
I have not done an analysis that compares the minimum standard for each community in our area, based as a percentage of population. I think when you look at it as a per capita basis, it should be fairly even with the other communities. When you look at West Bridgewater or other communities which are much lower in density, or much lower in population, they have less number of units that are on the list. So it would be interesting to go back and take a look at that.
Yeah, because they list, you mentioned the 2020 census.
Right.
2020 housing units were 37,304. Yeah. And developable station area was 995. I just wonder, I'm just always concerned about us doing our fair share, but not more than that, because we have so many issues related to population and servicing our population well.
I have to go back and look at it. You know, one thing to consider, because your voice is certainly not the first that I've heard that has concerns about that, either in Brockton or elsewhere, but I think the thing that my firm has been working on with our clients is the state's required the zoning, it is a law, but how do you make it work for the city? How do you make it work for your community? And so that becomes are you, whichever community I'm working with, is that community able to offer more to their community by how they design their compliant zoning? So in this case, thinking about not just multifamily housing, but what does that multifamily housing do? Does it offer a different type of housing that's missing from a community? So some of my smaller communities, for example, there's no place where somebody could downsize and move and stay within their community because they just don't have that type of housing. I think, too, there's also the economic development portion. So first of all, can you provide people more option about housing, something that the community doesn't have? Or some of my communities, for example, their housing stock is all older. It's harder to maintain. Could this offer the opportunity of new housing stock for a community? In some cases, the communities I've had, they have wonderful housing stock. It's older. It's also almost completely non-compliant because that community was built before the zoning came into place, and when zoning came into place, it just didn't match what was there. So can this rectify some of those nonconformities by making those areas conforming, giving people a pathway that's less onerous to invest in their properties? And I think the third thing that I think about is economic development. Do you have a community in which the lack of housing is driving people away from that community? Are you losing support for local businesses because of that? So I absolutely hear the concern from all of the communities I've worked with about what does this mean for us, but I like to try and turn it around. Is there an opportunity for this community that they can say, okay, we have to do this anyway, but how do we do it that's best for us? And I think particularly for Brockton, what I'm so excited about when I look at Brockton is you have these commuter rail stations. They're not fully utilized in terms of what's developed around them. You've got some wonderful older housing stock, wonderful settled neighborhoods. We worked on Campello, for example, but within that, there are pockets that could use some help. And that's what we've done with the form-based code. So this is kind of the stepping stone to get us to there. And I'm hoping that, the discussions today about the timing, we see that this buys us a little bit of time before we get to the form-based code, which is really more about that combination of protecting the things that you like and transforming the things that you want to transform. So that's how I've been seeing it in our work with this community.
Council, I've just conferred with Evan Sears from our office, and the state's website is incorrect at the 995 number, and the unit capacity is 5569. So not the 9,000.
Developable station area?
That's the stationary, that's the geography.
Oh, acres, I'm sorry.
Yeah, acres. You're thinking of the unit capacity.
The unit
rather than
capacity,
acres,
yeah, that's a much lower number than was given to us originally.
So what's the correct number?
The unit capacity is 5,596.
And that's that target that the compliance model has to show that you could, in theory, reach.
So that's what we could add.
In theory.
Not necessarily add. So the compliance model looks at the land as a blank slate. So when it calculates the unit capacity, it assumes that there's nothing there already. So in order to know what the unit capacity would add, we would have to calculate the existing units, subtract that from the unit capacity. In theory, that would be the net new units. In practice, there's a whole lot else that goes into development, as you know, other than zoning, but it would be that difference that would be the net new.
Okay. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Council Lally, anything?
No, I think the biggest thing is just another check through for Scribner's errors, which I don't think we need to amend if they are, just errors. Because throughout this, section I, number 1, 1D, 1H, stuff like that. So that's really all I.
Yeah.
We'll pull that together and submit it back to you.
And I wouldn't object, this being a stopgap, we want to make sure that we're as safe as possible until the real thing comes in. So if the counselor does amend it to pad the edges of the property a little, I wouldn't object to that.
You would?
Would not.
You would not, okay.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
So I brought up a number of edits and changes, and I'd like to make a motion to accept them all. Do I have to enumerate them?
I have them written down.
Okay.
Second.
All right.
Any further discussion? All in favor?
Thank you.
Then I make a motion to recommend favorably as amended.
Second.
All right. On the motion, the chair would like to thank both of you for the work on this. I would also like to say, and this is just philosophically, I don't think anyone is against housing, but I don't want to warehouse people in a very densely populated area where children don't have a place to play, where people who live there don't have parking spaces if they decide to have family visit from from some other city or from some other state. I think the impact on school populations, the impact on public safety, on fire and police, water consumption, sewer capacity. I mean, I don't know all of the different sewer mains that exist in the city, but to the extent that we have a lot more housing in a given area, does that mean we have to increase sewer capacity? And so I think when we talk housing, it seems like a very benign thing. Everyone wants to give someone a place to live. But from a public policy standpoint, it can have some very serious ramifications across a broad spectrum of city services. So why am I saying this? Because even with the form-based code issue that's out there, I have business groups that still are not quite sold on that. I mean, we still have some selling to do. And I wouldn't automatically assume that that's going to apply citywide and will be passed, but I think it's certainly worthy of discussion. We have to do this, what we're doing tonight.
Yes.
But, and I'm not one to delay, but I am one to be cautious.
And those are valid concerns, sir.
Because I want the public to know that we are deliberative in what we do. We think through all of these things. I thank my colleague, Councilor Nicastro, who sweats the details as she and I tease each other all the time, because it's very important. I mean, once you make a decision, it's not that easy to undo zoning. So, again, thank you. I won't belabor the point. There has been a motion properly seconded. All in favor? All opposed? It is unanimously recommended favorably. Thank you.
And if I may, I'd like to thank the counselors who have come to these public meetings and really supported this whole planning process, which includes Councilor Nicastro, Councilor Thompson, and Councilor Lally in the meetings that we've had with you, sir. So, Mr. Chairman, it's been a pleasure working with you.
You have a corresponding zoning map change next.
Stay there of the plan.
Just the map change.
Yes. The map change itself to create these.
Do you want me to read item 2? Will they get situated?
Mr.
Item number 2, ordinance. An ordinance pursuant to Section 27-5 of the City Ordinances zoning map to amend said map to designate the listed parcels as the MBTA Communities Overlay District. Invited to attend, Jeffrey Thompson, Ward 5 Counselor, Rob May, Director of Economic Planning and Development.
Tried to get away.
Oh,
Sorry.
is this a bit perfunctory? I mean,
This is the second half. The first half was, this is the text, and then the second half is, this is where it goes.
Okay.
I have a question.
Motion to recommend, sorry.
Thank you. I have a question before we go
Yes, ma'am.
forward. I went over your maps. There's nothing for the Montello Street area, the Montello area. You only have two train
Montello
stations on
Station
here.
area. The reason we've done that is strategically. We have not finished the Montello master plan yet. When that is done, we anticipate coming back to the council and either developing an overlay for that district, or hopefully by that point, we'll be on to the whole form-based code discussion. So it is coming. We didn't want to, Moses from on high say, you shall be this, without having a discussion with the community first.
Moses would love to do that.
But we're still in compliance with the
Yes, we are.
Communities Act.
Yes, we are.
Okay.
We're becoming
Okay.
more compliant then.
Through the
Okay,
chair.
it's coming. Thank you.
Councilor Lally?
Through the chair to Councilor Nicastro. The Montello councilors are just willing to let Campello go sort the bugs out before we're ready.
Thanks so much.
How noble of you.
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
Any further discussion? If not, all in favor? All opposed? None. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you all.
Item number 3, ordinance. An ordinance amending the city's zoning ordinance to regulate and permit accessory dwelling units by right in the R1 districts for single-family lots. Invited to attend, Winthrop Farrell Jr., Counselor at Large, Susan J. Castro, Ward 3 Counselor, James Plouffe, Commissioner of Building, Rob May, Director of Economic Planning and Development, Edward Williams, Deputy Chief, Brockton Fire Department, George DePina, Chief of Inspectional Services, Megan Bridges, City Solicitor or her designee.
By the way, on all these items, there are a number of public officials here, Chairman of the Zoning Board of Appeals, Building Commissioner. Just because we have recommended things favorably, if you see something that you need to bring to our attention, don't be bashful, and that counts for the public as well. For someone watching this meeting, and if they read something that concerns them, reach out to your counselor or reach out to the planning department. It does not mean that final action has been taken, and you'll hear this from me often. I would rather do something slowly and do it right than have to repent in leisure. I don't want to act in haste and repent in leisure. So, Chair Galligan, this is particularly targeted at you who have lived zoning for, I don't know, a quarter of a century. If you see anything that we're doing, I hope you and your colleagues will reach out to us and let us know. Good or bad? Good or bad? Commissioner.
Yeah, thank you, Mr. Chair, councilors. We're here regarding the accessory dwelling unit law that was passed recently by the legislature and signed by the governor. And what it basically requires is us to allow every single-family house in the city of Brockton or in the Commonwealth to have an accessory dwelling unit added onto the, allow the accessory dwelling unit to be added onto the house as of right. I believe it's February 2nd of this year of 2025, it will become law, and any person that applies for a permit to build an accessory dwelling unit will have to issue a permit for them. And if we do not change any ordinances, we do not change the restrictions on where they could go in our zoning, we're going to be stuck with whatever we have right now and wherever people want to put them. So this ordinance is here to put reasonable setbacks, reasonable restrictions on the installation of these ADUs.
Who would like to be recognized? Anyone want to touch this issue? Commissioner, I did sign this, I believe, to get this before the council. And you did too.
Yeah.
So for my part, I'm not particularly fond of the state with all of these mandates. I just want that publicly known. And I am concerned, even though I support housing, I am concerned that this could really change the flavor of some single-family residential neighborhoods where people regard their home as their peace and tranquility. And that peace and tranquility could be shattered by a lot of different accessory dwelling units coming into their neighborhood. It is the law. The legislature has spoken. We do have to react, and here we are. And so I'll turn it over to Councilor Nicastro. Let you pick it up from there.
I don't have much to say. I'm really glad we went with the existing setbacks on this draft because so many of the neighborhoods are so densely populated now. Speak about the standards on the detached ADUs, if you would. It's on the back of the page. And the sewer service and the water service and the utilities.
Sure. First off, the location of ADUs, if they are to be detached, is recommended by us through this ordinance to be the setbacks that we have for the primary structure. So if you were in an R1C zone, you would have to have a 30-foot setback in the rear and 15 on the sides. And then you would be required to be 10 feet from any other dwelling or any other accessory structures. And as far as the water service and the sewer service, it was my understanding, and Commissioner Hill is not here tonight, but Commissioner Hill has indicated that he does not want to have pass-throughs from one structure to another. So he has indicated that having separate water and sewer utilities was what he would like to see happen for these accessory dwelling units. Now, that being said, and I'm answering that particular question, but I would say that we've talked in the office, and we believe that a majority of the accessory dwelling units that we're going to see in the city aren't necessarily going to be detached. They're going to be attached. And that's just our general feeling based on what we've seen through code enforcement over the years. A lot of basements, a lot of apartment attics, and even possible additions onto houses. The most likely scenario in the city of Brockton. But for that, the fact that they can be detached, we felt that these regulations were reasonable.
Okay. And what about the attached?
For the attached, it would be, the setbacks for attached would be the same as the principal structure also. So if you were to put an addition on the back of your house to be an ADU, you would have to meet the 15, 30, and 30, say in the R1C zone, or if it was an R1A, R1B, that's slightly bigger.
Well, I know Mr. DePina is regularly finding illegal bedrooms in basements and attics and off porches, and how will that be impacted by this new law?
The construction that we find, we currently have on the books in our zoning, or in our ordinances, illegal apartment fines for above number of units allowed in the zone, and that's what we use to fine and to cite people that have these illegal apartments already. That ordinance is going to become kind of moot for most of our properties, because now it will be allowed per zoning as of right. There will be cases where we find 3 families that have a legal apartment in the basement. That will still apply. But for the majority of them, the single-family houses that have them in the basement currently would then not be a zoning violation. However, I was talking to our counsel, Counsel Verdi, our Attorney Verdi, this is going to be a building code violation if we find illegal apartments in the basement and they try to claim it as an ADU. Because in order to build an ADU, you have to have building permits and certificate of occupancy. And those illegal apartments that we're finding now will still be illegal because they won't have the correct permits to have them. That can be rectified.
I was just going to say, that's just a paperwork thing, right?
Not just a paperwork, Counselor. It's a paperwork initially, but then when you go and construct it, you're going to have to do some reconstruction. If you put an apartment in the basement, you're going to have to put a fire rating between the ADU and the basement. You're going to put a fire rating between the ADU and the upstairs or the side of your house, wherever it's in a common wall or common ceiling. And then you're also going to have to separate utilities. And you're not going to be able to pass through the ADU in order to get to your utilities. So in a typical raised ranch where your utilities may be in the basement, you can't turn the basement into an ADU and then have to get through that ADU to turn off your water or access your electrical. So there's going to be some construction that is necessary in order to separate these units from each other.
So the attached ADUs are going to have specific requirements by law, and it's going to be confusing for people.
Yes. Are
Are we going to prepare a brochure? Are we going to have a seminar?
Yes, we'll be putting together information packets. The planning department had put one forth a few months ago. They edited it from another location. We'll be continuing doing those, talking to people, giving information to the associations in the city, trying to, not only all the associations in the city, but in different languages.
Language, yeah, good.
So we can educate people.
And what about parking?
So right now, the state has started regulations for ADUs. They're draft regulations. They're not enacted yet. Currently, the draft regulations state that no additional parking is required within a half mile of a bus station, a train station, and a few other items, a subway station, which we don't have. At face value, that's only a half mile from the 3 train stations that we have and the bus station, which is across from the police department. But under the draft regulations, currently, the draft regulations state that if you have a bus transit system that travels down the street and you can flag them down, anywhere you can and you can flag them down, it's considered the bus station. So technically,
Oh, yeah, I saw the emails on this.
yes, technically, if you go by that definition, the entire city of Brockton is within a half mile of a bus station, and that would require no additional parking.
Seems like the language needs to be fixed in the state law.
Yes, and I believe there was some seminars recently put on by the state and put on by others where the state's actually asked for input into how to better change those regulations and what kind of problems they would the cause. In particular, I believe the bus station and the transit location for the half mile was of interest.
Which is a cool way of asking, were we wrong?
Correct.
Will you be weighing in on that?
I believe the city will be.
Good, that's good. I'm interested to hear from our public safety representatives who are here this evening, and your thoughts on this ADU. Good evening.
Good evening, councilors. I'll just give a quick synopsis of, and I can speak from a couple of parts. I agree with you, Councilor, greatly. I think the state painted with a very wide brush on this, and there are a lot of things that the localities now have to come up with to make it work within their own communities, and that's a deep concern as the fire chief. I'll give you one example, and Deputy Williams can elaborate afterwards. Utilities. We spoke of water and sewer. The utilities have basically stated and come right out and said that they will not, for a detached ADU, run separate utility lines to that building. So think about a house in your neighborhood that has a fire and they have an ADU. Now, the front house, we have to shut power off because there was a problem. Now they have so many people in the detached ADU, we have to shut that power off. If they're running that power off the house that's currently there, they're also going to lose power. So our concern is about running parallel, whether it be National Grid or Eversource Gas, whatever it is, off of that to that detached ADU. Our thoughts are to have that homeowner that's going to put that detached ADU on run it themselves if the utilities are not going to hire a contractor to do it. So the idea behind all of this, again, with housing is phenomenal. We have a major issue. But I think another perfect example, there has been nothing brought before the Mass State GIS program that deals with our state 911 as to how these are going to be numbered. In the city of Brockton, we have a number of buildings behind buildings, the way it was prior to zoning. The way that's worked is it's always been, if it's 500 Main Street, it's 500 rear. It would be the rear ones. But there's nothing that lines that up, and that's what we're working on to tackle right now. Deeply concerning. Another problem, they've not really taken density calculations into this. Technically, every single person on my street could have an ADU. Now, is that a parking issue? Absolutely. They can talk about their bus terminals all they want, but this is a concern. So, though I know, I was just at a meeting this morning with the State Chiefs Association, working with the State Fire Marshal's Office and Department of Fire Services. We are, at our level, putting in some of our own recommendations. That open period begins tomorrow. So we will be filing with that opinion of what our thoughts are, some of it being access for fire apparatus. We have a way of working around that in the city, and we always have, but some of smaller communities never have to deal with that. So there are some chiefs in smaller communities that they're very concerned about. But those are some of the things that I know are concerning to me as the fire chief, and Deputy Williams will obviously elaborate greater, but there are concerns, and I think they paint it with a broad brush. They've opened this opinion period up, but I think we have to make it known where our concerns are, especially in a city like Brockton, where we're very dense as it is. So,
I think in most of the gateway cities, which
Absolutely.
are the older cities that have so many people coming to our country too, we have to keep them safe. We have to
No
do
question.
all we can.
Well, that's what I'm charged with, and that's why I have to look at that bigger picture. Although it's now statute, I have to look at the bigger picture of how it's going to affect the city of Brockton.
Right.
Thank you. This is very hard for the city to work with the regulations that don't exist and are hard and fast right now. And they promise they'll have them done by February, but we at the same time have to have our regulations done by February. So we may have our regulations done, but when their final regulations come out, we may have to come back, or other people may have to come back and reform our ordinances to work the way we want it to work. As the chief said, we have a concern with electrical and gas services to houses. We're constantly shutting off electrical and gas services to houses, and we don't want to kill two houses at the same time. So we would propose eliminating number 7 and putting in language something to the effect of, for detached ADUs, the electric and gas services must be separate and distinct from the primary dwelling, and that so that the disconnection of services to the primary unit or the ADU will not affect the other unit. And then the chief's concern with numbering. We have a very good numbering system in the city of Brockton, and for those that don't know, usually it's from the intersection of the street you come from. For instance, Braymore Road. You start at the intersection. If you measure up, if you're number 138, your front door is usually at 1,380 feet up the road. So I can drive up a road, and I know how far I have to drive before I get to near a house. With this new regulation, it's going to be confusing. We would propose language that if ADU is built behind a primary dwelling unit, that it would get the number of the house plus the termination rear, and that a sign be put in the front yard indicating that there is a 138 rear at that property, so that the gentlemen and women on the trucks will realize that there's a house behind there, because in some cases it may be a 2-story house with a 1-story ADU back in the yard, and we wouldn't know it, and it's going to make that a little bit tough. The state regulations currently call for a fire access road, which is built to hold a fire truck to within 25 feet of the front door of an ADU, of a dwelling built behind another dwelling. I'm hoping that stays, and that won't be a parking area. That will be an access area, which will make it costly to do an ADU. I think the majority of ADUs in the city of Brockton you're going to find will be in the primary dwelling, in the basement, on the second floor, maybe a little addition. I don't think we're going to see a huge influx of small ones built in the backyard, because I think it's going to be too costly to accomplish that in the city of Brockton.
So your language about numbering the address, we would put that in under standards for detached ADUs.
It would be under detached ADUs, and the language I whipped up this afternoon was detached ADUs built behind the primary dwelling shall be numbered with the same number of the principal structure, with the addition of the word rear. And I can provide you a copy of that. It may have to be wordsmithed a little bit, but that's the intent of it.
Okay. Did you get that, Attorney Resnick?
I'll get it from him.
Okay, thank you.
So that would be striking 7, inserting your language about the ADUs, electrical and gas services, to be separate, and then adding a section on the numbering.
Correct.
Strike 7?
That's the one we want stricken, right? All utilities go through the...
Oh, 7, up above, okay.
Isn't it?
Yeah.
We were just asking if the number 7, all utilities for attached ADUs must pass through the principal structure. That's the one that Commissioner Hill does not want, and
For attached ADUs.
for attached, yeah.
The number 7 I have says electric utilities for detached ADUs shall be brought to the building based on the requirements of the utility provider.
There should be two,
Gotcha.
there should be
Okay.
attached and detached, yes.
Okay.
Okay.
Yeah.
What other concerns do you have?
As far as the fire code and access, I think we can cover this with these two. It's going to be a disaster. It's going to ruin every single family neighborhood in the city of Brockton, but that wasn't our choosing. That was that wish of the governor.
And to the deputy's point on that, I spoke briefly about the density in that, but what about the density in these actual ADUs? You know, if you have what, I think the number, correct me if I'm wrong, Deputy, is 6 or more unrelated persons, it now needs to be a sprinkled property. There's a lot of stuff that is not addressed in this legislation that changes things that I know many, the State Fire Marshal's Office, many chiefs throughout the Commonwealth are deeply concerned about. And there's been, again, this open, I'll be very interested to see what's going to come out of this open period when you can put your opinions in and put stuff forward like we choose to. Because I'm going to be very interested, because there's probably things that we don't notice that aren't the public safety aspect of it that are concerning as well.
How many people will be stuffed into a little house?
Absolutely. No question. That's a deep concern.
Sure
That's a
is.
deep concern, because, you're looking at 900 square feet. It doesn't say how that 900 square feet really internally has to be constructed or used, in that, as residential, so.
Mr. Pliff, would you speak to the size and the concerns?
Yes, what specific, Councilor?
With the size and the number of people, the occupancy.
Okay. There are minimum, in the building code, there are minimum square footages you have to account for each individual person living in a building. And I don't have those off the top of my head. I believe it might be 200 square feet. But you also have minimum under the state sanitary code, minimum sizes for bedrooms and other rooms. So there will be minimums looked at during design and construction. But your 900 square feet, if that is the size of the house you're going to be building, is rather large. I mean, we're talking a 40 by 25 or 40 by 20 something house. That's a rather large big building.
It's a couple of bedrooms.
Yeah, that's
And a
at least a
living
couple
space.
bedrooms. You could have a small kitchen, a living room, and then 3 bedrooms possibly. So we could be talking about medium-sized family living in these. And depending on the size of your house. So the size is actually, the maximum is 900 square feet or 1/2 of the primary structure. So if you have a 1,200 square foot ranch-style house, your maximum ADU is going to be 600 square feet. If you have a garage that's attached to your house, and the garage is 400 square feet and your main structure is 1,200, you can turn that garage into the ADU.
And what about open space requirements?
No open space requirement. Well, open space requirements would be similarly to what we have right now for lot coverage and green space that we have in the ordinance.
But would that be based on the primary residence? Would it be an entirely different one based on the size of the ADU?
I would say no. I would say that the lot coverage and the green space requirements should stay the same as the current requirements. So the more building you have, the bigger the lot's going to have to be.
Right. And that will probably help, or it will probably render some of these not possible.
It is possible. I mean, the legislation is put together to enable these to be put in there, and they don't want us being municipalities to be overly restrictive to block houses. But yes, in some cases, I believe those kinds of regulations will limit some locations. But again, we're not limited to just accessory structures being detached. We also have the accessory structures that could be inside the house.
Right. And that's going to be very difficult to regulate.
It will be it will be. I mean, it's going to be a challenge. And we're up for the challenge for that. It's going to be actually, in a weird, twisted way, it's going to be kind of fun for me to address some of these houses as they come in for building permits and try to figure out how they're doing it. And it's going to be a learning experience.
I'm not sure Mr. DePina agrees.
I'm sure.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Anyone else?
Yes, please.
Councilor Thompson.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good evening, gentlemen.
Good evening.
Thank you for being here this evening. You know, we just went through one ordinance that was a state mandate for increased housing. We're now dealing with another state mandate for increased housing. And as the conversation's proceeding, it seems it's not fully baked as of yet. And so just, I have some questions, but for you, Mr. Chair, is the point to postpone this matter so we can keep deliberating? Or, because you said that when do we have to have this on the books by?
February,
Okay.
February 2nd.
So we would have time to postpone, but
We
I
don't
think
have
we
much
ought to
time.
get as much work done tonight as possible.
Yeah.
Okay.
If you don't send it back to council before Tuesday, let me see.
Either second Monday or second Tuesday in
Yeah,
January.
if you don't send it to council by Tuesday, January 7th, you will not make the February 2nd deadline.
For the additional readings.
Right. So the timeline has been to do it for second reading would be January 13th. You also do need to hold a public hearing, as you do with the MBTA's Community Act, and then final passage would be January 20th.
But there's an expectation through this open comment period that the state statute will change. Would that then automatically change our ordinance, or do we have to come back and address that?
Just to be clear in the use of the language, the state statute will not change.
It's the regulations.
The regulations are expected to change. They have a timeline for like mid-January for public comment, and then they were going to try and do some sort of draft bylaws for towns to consider. But I don't think they're going to give you enough time before February 2nd deadline.
I mean, some of the things that you brought up that may change in the future, say regarding the parking issue, that, that's going to be a major comment. Like you said, if they're counting every telephone pole that has a white bat sign around it, you're right, that's pretty much the whole city. That's a half mile from a bus station. So if in their regulations, they change that automatically changes within our ordinance, even though it's not specified in the ordinance. Can I assume that's correct?
Right.
Okay. All right, so I'm imagining we'll be revisiting this, throughout the next year or so. But number one, who drafted this?
I did. And let me explain to you what I did. I went to what the state statute was, and they literally have a chart that says, this is what a municipality can do, this is what a municipality cannot do. So anything that said what we can do, I put in there. Anything that said that we cannot do, I left out. There were 2 different webinars. The law department and I attended both of them, and then just took some of their feedback and just anything they said we could do, I put it in there.
Okay.
And we did have some input from Deputy Williams and Mr. Bluff.
Okay. So regarding the setbacks for a detached ADU, when you say they have to comply with the existing setbacks on a primary residence, that's from the primary residence, right? So like if it's a 30-foot front yard setback, this has to be 30 feet, like if you're going to put it in the back of a house, it would have to be 30 feet from the house itself, right?
No.
No.
No. The intent is that the ADU would be subject to the requirements of the setbacks of the zone. Setbacks of the zones state right now, for example, in an R1C, 30 feet from the rear property line, 30 feet from the front property line, and 15 feet from the side's property line.
So it's still in relation to the property line and not any other structure on the property itself?
Well, in addition to that, there's also a 10-foot minimum setback from any other structure.
Okay. That would be shed, pool, primary residence?
Correct.
Okay.
And,
Now-
one other thing, Council, I just wanted to mention something that you stated. The importance of the February 2nd deadline is to get something on the books that we can live with.
Yeah.
If we do not do that, and on February 2nd or February 3rd, I'm going to have a line out the door with people that have existing sheds that are sitting on people's property lines, garages too close to the property line, and they're going to be applying for ADUs, and I will not be able to deny that.
Because there's another state statute that would override this one, like, they basically
If we
have a draft ADU that would come into effect if we do not do this.
No, it's wide open.
Wide open. We have to have our own
Okay.
ordinances.
So there's no regulation whatsoever at that point.
That's right.
Correct. That's why
That's
we're
allowed.
trying to put reasonable regulations in.
Okay. So as somebody who often often watches our zoning board meetings, I think there's, we see a lot of additions being built, and there's always, the fear, and I think just recently in this last ZBA meeting, there was a denial of an addition because of a fear that this large addition that they say is only going to be used for bedroom space or a large living room is now all going to be converted essentially to ADUs. And so that fear that we were trying to prevent is now going to essentially be, run rampant throughout the city. The ADUs, so if in that space, right, this 900 square foot addition that was living space only, now we can put a kitchen in there. So at that point, how do they get how do we make that right? They have the existing space. They're now allowed, as you said, by right to turn it into an ADU. Do they have to now, you said, have to come to you for some certificate of occupancy? Or let's say our fear was realized, and from day one, they put in a kitchen or, something like that. So they don't necessarily need to build anything prospectively. It's already there. What would that person now do to kind of make that illegal apartment now legal? Do they come to you and say, hey, just kidding, and now I have a kitchen and all of that. So what do we do to make those right?
All right, the first step is they have to apply for a permit, a building permit. The building permit is going to include plans that show two separate units. They're going to have to show their egress components. They're going to have to show a separate fire alarm and smoke detector system. They're going to have to show separate utilities. They're going to have to show that any common walls or ceilings or floors are fire rated. And when we say fire rated, we could do a class on it, but it's basically there's Underwriter Laboratories has tested a bunch of assemblies of different materials for heat transfer, and that creates a UL label. And if you come into my office with your plans, you have to provide me with a label saying this is a 1 hour firewall, a fire rated partition between this unit and this unit. So you'd have to provide that information and any other information relative to the building code for that separate unit. It wouldn't simply be a blessing of an illegal apartment, because 95% of the time these illegal apartments do not comply with fire separation or separate utilities or separate smoke detector systems.
Right. So we probably wouldn't expect a lot of people coming forward to say, to legalize their current illegal apartment due to what you just said, all the additional requirements now required to make that legal.
We will see them. They will come to us.
Yeah.
We're going to deny them right off the bat and say, no, go back to the drawing board. But we are going to see a lot of people coming that way. They've already started.
Okay, great. So as you said, if you have an attached, obviously a detached is going to have its own ingress, egress. An attached also needs its own ingress and egress that is separate from the main dwelling.
Yes and no.
Oh, okay.
Okay, so yes, you can do that, or you can have a common hallway.
That has no access to the primary structure, or would it matter?
It wouldn't matter. So if you're your typical three-family house right now, a bad example, a typical single-family house, you walk in a hallway, and you have a door to go to the basement, and maybe you have a door that goes upstairs, and maybe it's just a staircase. You build a wall around the staircase. Now you can go through a door to the top, go to the door to the bottom. That complies.
So you would have to say in a raised ranch, you walk in, you would have to cover that stair entrance?
Yes.
And then, okay, and then that
yeah,
would be compliable.
In some fashion. There's it's probably a lot of difficulty, but yes, in some fashion.
Okay. Now, in a detached ADU, it says that it has to have a separate hookup for electricity. So now you're going to have essentially, potentially, wires now running through your backyard to this ADU. Does that create any concern, or?
There is concern about putting utilities through a backyard. Everybody builds in the backyard and digs up things. So, yeah, putting the electric service through the backyard is always going to be a concern. I do know that the National Grid is not very happy about putting in telephone poles to give services to buildings in the back.
Right.
I believe, and I'm not an expert in National Grid, but I believe they would require you to put your own telephone pole in to their standards to run the wire in. That is if we can get National Grid to approve a new service.
Right, exactly. I also think, some of these issues that Deputy Chief William brought up, that, it makes me think, so just the address issue. We've kind of addressed it as a detached, say, 45 rear, but what do you do in an attached? I mean, this is a completely separate living unit, occupied by a different family. So how do we identify now that unit? Is that level one, apartment one, like apartment one? Is that how, do we have any idea of how we're going to do that?
B.
B?
R for rear. Yeah.
No, they're great suggestions. I don't know. We don't have that yet. I would say that I know in our three families currently, a lot of the older three families have two numbers. I lived in the third floor of the flat my great aunt owned. She owned the house up back. It was two buildings on the same property. She had 35. The first floor was 37, and the second and third floors combined were 39. So you had 39.2, 39.3, but 37 was on the first floor. So it was quite confusing in that respect.
Well, especially if those numbers are being used by your neighbors.
Correct.
So, like, I don't know how we're going to differentiate for mail. Do they get a separate trash service now? The police, if you have a detached in the backyard, how do they got to now come through somebody else's property? Because it's still all going to be under one ownership. You have a right for your privacy, but the cops are going to come into your backyard to address whatever's going on back there. How do they even access it? They got to come through your fence, or how do they get there? So it just seems, it seems rushed, and it doesn't seem well thought through, just for the simple questions of, mail and trash and access and, all of those things. And now we're being told that essentially we've got to approve this today, because what time is there between now and January 6th to hold another ordinance meeting? I just think that the city itself really needs to have a plan on identifying what the, really what the problems are with this, and as a united effort, a letter from the city directed to this open comment period. If there are other communities that have the same problem, we should probably partner with them to really, raise our voice, because, I mean, I don't know much about much, and I can already see a bunch of problems here. And so the fact that we have to quickly put this on the books, have people probably immediately thereafter start building, when it's currently a half-baked plan. God bless you guys and the issues you're going to have to deal with. State, why are you doing this to us? This is unnecessary, but we're obligated. So thank you, gentlemen, for appearing tonight. We'll work with you in any way we can to make this the best ordinance possible, and I'm sure we'll have to revisit this, throughout the year and probably even further into the future. But it's frustrating. But thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilor Thompson. Councilor Lally.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I really think that, we've kind of covered what I'm going to say, and I think Council Thompson's done a fine job of it as well. It's just, this is a shame. I understand the need. I understand what's brought the Commonwealth to this point, but I think that this is an overreaction on a statewide basis. And I think really, throughout this ordinance is the phrase single family, and we're referring to, single family properties. And I can't take that completely seriously, because they're not anymore with this. We run a large risk of, taking these areas that are, quiet neighborhoods and doubling the amount of traffic and doubling the amount of people. These were developments, especially with, myself, Councilor Thompson, Councilor Nicastro, on, the eastern portion of the city, that were built in an era where, a family had one car. And now everybody's got a car per house. All the cars are parked on the street. And now you're going to put another house in everyone's backyard. So, yeah, we have to, we don't have Milton money. We can't sort this out and play for time. But I think that this is really going to come down to us being very, very clear with the people who are applying. But we've questioned it, we've poked it, we've grilled it. It's been, sweated and worried over by people who, are not doing it with glee. They're doing it because they want to make sure that, when everybody falls, we, fall in a way where we're not going to break something. But I just wanted to note my displeasure, not with any architects of this, but with the fact that it had to be assembled in the first place. Thank you, Mr. Chairman.
Thank you, Councilor Lally. Gentlemen, were any of you solicited, actually, my colleagues, were any of you solicited for input on this particular law when it was working its way through the legislature? I don't remember anything.
No?
I had one brief conversation with a member of our delegation, but that was after they'd already voted, and the particular member did not read a lot of the ADU part. Okay.
And do you know if the Fire Chiefs Association, were you ever solicited for comment on what you thought this ADU law might do with respect to fire service? And so I'll ask the same question to Commissioner Plouffe about the building, your association. Either one of you
were not
asked for any input?
We were not.
See, this is a classic, I'm editorializing a little bit, but we end up with having to pick up the pieces. This should have been a local option statute. This should have been those communities that feel that they can absorb this type of activity and contribute to housing could opt in. But I think to mandate it, to require us to do it, I think was a disservice. So I have a question for go ahead.
Oh, sorry, after you.
I have a question for Legislative Council. These ADUs are going to require a lot of inspections, making sure that they are erected where they're supposed to be, from proper setback requirements, numbered properly. Can this ordinance include a $300 fee over and above any other building fees that are required for the purposes of continuing inspections during the construction process?
Likely not. We pretty much need to treat an ADU like a principal dwelling. So if we don't require it of the principal dwelling, we should not be requiring it of the ADU.
Okay, so we'll pick up the costs of all of the extra work.
There is site plan review
Yeah.
listed. It's an option they said municipalities can.
All right, last question to you, Legislative Council. Is this being challenged at all, do you know, by any communities?
That I don't know. The one thing I do want to comment is the draft in front of you, I wouldn't even consider it our final draft before passage. I have some changes, but I'd like to wait till the public comment comes out. So I might be asking the council to make the changes at maybe the second reading or even final reading. When we originally drafted this, I believed it to only apply to single-family lots, so you'll see that language. The regulations and the webinars that I attended and with discussions with the law department really challenges that it is principal dwellings is considered anything that has at least one dwelling unit, and it is allowed wherever single families unit uses are allowed, whether by right. So it's a lot more expansive than what is submitted before you. So we have to make those changes. Like one of the changes I have in here is to change it so it says, instead of on single-family lots, to change it to be where single-family residential dwellings are permitted or an allowable use. And if you think about that, and how many of your districts allow single-family by either permit or as an allowable use, presumably, if there is a property on there that has a dwelling, that property can have a ADU. And I think that that is, from the regulations, way more than perhaps what the state intended. So
your preference is, though, to move this along tonight, subject to further revision at a future reading before the council?
correct, yes, and I can take the comments from Deputy Williams and include that. You guys can either do his tonight, or I can get those as a better working one, and we can just kind of do, not a substitute amend ordinance, but do it as a whole, however you all preferred.
Yeah, my preference would be to do it as a package, once you get it, pull it all together.
Right. Because that does remind me, if you don't mind, Mr. Chair, that we often see at the zoning board, people trying to build another house on a lot in which they believe is subdivided, right? I mean, the meets and bounds issue that we're always talking about, they believe it's deeded as two lots, but really it's merged under our laws, and so now they would have to seek a subdivision. They can now by right just build an ADU on that lot? Or is there something we can tighten up to not allow that, or can they now just do that?
Yeah, if it's a single
Yeah, it's a single lot.
So everybody who's,
use district.
can we,
If
if you want to just come forward, Chief? Because that's what's going to happen now. Instead of seeking a subdivision, they're just going to build an ADU on that lot.
And as the chair comes up here, interestingly, any lot that's substandard currently that needs zoning board relief to build a single family will then, after the single family relief is given and the building permit's issued, and they can come back and say, I want to add an ADU.
And you have to let them.
And we have to let them. And I think they'd be smart not to say that to the zoning board, because sometimes I think they'd say it, the zoning board would say, oh, wait a minute, maybe we shouldn't allow this single family. You know, that's something that's going to be one of the things we cross.
Does anyone have a problem with
I don't.
No objection.
with, Ken Galligan speaking, the chair of the zoning board? Good evening.
Good evening. I wasn't going to speak tonight, but I figured I'd better say something about zoning while I'm here. As you know, the zoning that we operate here in the city was drafted in 1967. And the minimum size lot under this 1967 law is a 30,000 square foot lot. And ironically, in some of the outskirts of the city, where probably the most affluent neighborhoods are located, those homes are all built on 30,000 square foot lots. People bought in these neighborhoods simply because they wanted to live on a 30,000 square foot lot. They wanted to live in a single family residential area. What I see coming down the road here is probably, ironically, these 30,000 square foot lots are going to be wide open for putting these new units on these lots. And suddenly, all of what we know is single-family residences in the city are going to go away. This city is going to turn into a multi-family residential city.
Everywhere.
And if it isn't going to be in the larger lot areas, all of the in-law apartments that have come before the zoning board, we have not allowed because in-laws are not allowed. Now, all of a sudden, all of these in-law apartments will be allowed. So if you want to put an addition on the house, have at it. The other thing that's going to have a drastic effect on these neighborhoods is what has been mentioned tonight relative to lack of parking, on-site parking. When this law was drafted in 1967, every family had one family car. I think the reality is today that every bedroom in a house has a car. So if you have a two-story colonial with 4 bedrooms, most likely there's 4 cars in that house. So now if you allow another dwelling to be put on this plot and you don't require any additional parking, you're going to see a major change in how parking is laid out in many of these neighborhoods. You're going to find cars that are parked on front lawns, which we don't like to see, but I can see it coming down the road. If you have a driveway that services the current house that's there now, and that driveway has to be enlarged in order to service the house in the rear, how can the people in the front park in the driveway when that has to be left open for the people in the back? There's a lot of issues coming. And I just want to say that from a zoning perspective, I just hope we don't get inundated with requests because people are 2 feet short from the sideline, they're 1 feet short from the sideline. But overall, the way the city has been laid out, with neighborhoods that were designed to be single-family residential neighborhoods, we have the potential right now to see all of those neighborhoods, as we have known them, to turn into something that's going to be different. So I just want to let that be known, that that's what I see on zoning, and zoning, as you know, in the city needs to be addressed, and we've talked about that for a long time. But ironically, with the 30,000 square foot lot, all of these affluent neighborhoods that have a 30,000 square foot lot, they're going to be wide open to put possibly a 900 square foot house in the backyard. That's 30 by 30. That is a huge dwelling that can be put in a backyard. So if you moved into a single family neighborhood because you wanted to be there, and now your neighbor is going to put another dwelling in their backyard, that's going to have a negative effect on you.
Sure it
So
is.
I only want to say that because I think everybody should realize that with this law, things are going to change. The city is going to take on a different look. So from a zoning perspective, that's all I want. These guys are dealing with all the idiosyncrasies, but I just think as an overall view, I just wanted to say that.
Thank you.
Thank you,
Thank
Chief.
you.
My turn. Your turn. Go ahead.
Thank you, Mr. Chairman. I have a question for Legislative Council. Can we, I'm hoping that once this hits Lexington or another comparable community, somebody pushes a panic button and this is reevaluated. So question, I guess, for my colleagues, if they'd be amenable to it, and a question for the Legislative Council, are we allowed to do it? What about some kind of amendment at the bottom of this, just that says automatically if the state undoes this measure or changes it or gives us an out, or if they take it away, we, at passage in the state, this is automatically stricken?
Yep, I know what you mean.
Yeah. Is that possible?
I will, because I'm already in this proposal that I have created changes to, I reference the state statute, so I'll do some sort of reference to it.
Okay, so we hopefully can just pull it when they get some calls from Duxbury.
Or your own state delegation.
Fair enough.
Okay, Major.
Thank you.
Councilor DeCastro.
Thank you. Attorney Resnick, in the second paragraph, there's a typo, the word amended.
Yep.
And then I wanted to ask, can this be reformatted to be an outline form so that we have, A, B's, C's, and D's, 1, 2, 3, 4?
So that is, I have learned through working with the people that do our codification, that that's a little bit of a waste of effort.
Why?
Because they will go in and do it themselves, and they make it more consistently. So the MBTA zoning, those references won't stick. the people that do our codification goes through, that's part of what we pay them for, and they change it. But I can go in if you'd like and put 1, 2, 3, 4 just for discussion purposes, but
Or A, B, C, D,
I've been leaving stuff out on purpose because of
because
the
of them doing
codification
it?
work.
Well, it just makes it so much easier to cite.
Yep. I will add, though.
Okay. Thank you, that's all. Thank you.
Anyone else? Are we all set? All right, so I guess there'll be a motion to recommend favorably, subject to further revisions to be submitted by Legislative Council prior to the final vote
Passage,
to
yeah.
ordain.
Okay.
Is that
Is that a motion?
understood?
So moved.
Second?
All right, any further discussion? If not, all in favor? All opposed? It is a vote, unanimous.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you for all your work.
Thank you, gentlemen.
Next item up.
Item number 4, ordinance, an ordinance to replace Section 12-28 towing in its entirety and to adopt a revised ordinance for towing operations in the city of Brockton relative to the towing list, qualification requirements, and assignments. Invited to attend, Jeffrey Thompson, Ward 5 Counselor, Brenda Perez, Brockton Police Chief, or her designee.
And I think Sergeant Skinner is here with us tonight.
Yes, sir. Good evening.
Good evening.
And
Councilor
Okay.
Thompson?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Good evening, Sergeant Skinner. Thank you for being with us tonight. Just a quick preface. I've been working with the Brockton Police Department, both Chief and Sergeant Skinner, on this tow ordinance. And essentially, the reason for presenting this ordinance is to modernize our existing tow ordinance. This ordinance is going to be more in compliance or more in line with the state towing ordinance. And it's also, so it'll specify different categories. It's going to reduce the number of current tow businesses on our list from the current 15 to 10, but that's not exactly true because there'll be 10 per category. Is that correct? 10 allowable per category. I know we won't have that many per category, but this allows for that, correct?
Well, with the new contract, we only required 1 truck per company in the past. With this new contract, we require 2 trucks per company. So essentially, right now, there's only 15 trucks mandated outside of like a heavy tow. Now, with 10 companies, there's going to be 20 trucks required, which is going to increase the capacity of our towing here in the city of Brockton to just tow more vehicles and provide more coverage.
Right. So this is also an effort to, make our towing list a little more fair and equitable for the businesses throughout the tow businesses in our city. And then just lastly, this is going to be a 3-year contract. Right now, it's currently 1-year contracts, and to reduce the administrative burden on the police department, we decided to increase this to a 3-year contract. But it also has city council review. So if there's any situation in which an emergency decision has to be made by the chief, we're going to provide her the flexibility to make that decision. But then within a 30-day period for the matter to come back before the city council for our review. So it modernizes our current ordinance. It makes it more fair and equitable for our tow companies, and it does still allow for some city council control when certain changes need to be made. So with that, I'll turn it over to Sergeant Skinner.
Thank you. Do you have any direct questions for me, or do you?
I think, quickly, I think Councilor Thompson summarized what the thrust of the ordinance is. So, colleagues, anyone else have any questions?
Well, maybe, Sergeant Skinner, you could run through some of the specifics, right? So we're modernizing our tow ordinance. Why do we need to modernize, and how is it being modernized?
All right, so as we know, tows have been a topic of concern for quite some time. What we've done is we've incorporated the Mass State Police contract to be fair and equitable and to just modernize our existing tow contract. Councilor Thompson, you had brought up the fact that council is now going to have some oversight on any type of 30-day period from the chief of police. Also, too, we're reducing the number of trucks from 15 down to 10 we just spoke about, but we're actually gaining trucks. We're gaining 5 more trucks because we're going to 20 rather than 15. We've also added 3 categories. Category 1 is going to be for regular tows, Category 2 is going to be for heavy tows, and Category 3 is going to be for all electric vehicles. Each company can apply for either one or all 3. It depends on what kind of equipment they have and whether they can service each one of those categories. So,
This tow also does add some administrative fees in the application process to kind of offset some of the administrative costs in maintaining this list.
it does. It's going to be $1,000 for the 3 years, which is almost kind of consistent with what we have now. It's $250 per year, which would be $750 plus $250 to the city of Brockton, which would be $1,000.
Right. I mean, that's this ordinance in a nutshell.
All right. Anyone else? Councilor Nacastro.
Thank you for being here, Officer Skinner. How will this help?
One, by
What problems are we encountering with the tow list and how it's being carried out right now under the existing ordinance?
So this is going to help simply because we'll have more oversight and more control with less companies. That's really the nutshell of all, just more oversight and more control with less. However, because we're requiring more vehicles or more trucks to be part of this solution, we'll have actually more coverage for the city of Brockton with the additional tow trucks.
Okay. And you're in support of this?
I am.
Okay. Okay, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome. I would note for my colleagues that this ordinance will give the chief, at his or her sole discretion, the right to change or establish further written rules and regulations relative to towing. So as perhaps the towing industry evolves or as state regulations come in, the police chief will be able to apply those to our local vendors. And I think that's important to give the chief that flexibility, so you don't have to come back here and ask for an ordinance change. You'll be able to administratively improve towing services in the city. So, anything else, colleagues?
No.
Motion to recommend favorably.
Second.
All right, there's been a motion made and properly seconded to recommend favorably with no further discussion. All those in favor? All those opposed? It is a vote unanimously. Thank you, Cy.
Thank you.
Item number 5, ordinance, an ordinance to replace Chapter 11, Article 3, dealers in secondhand precious metals or gems, and to adopt a revised ordinance for dealers in secondhand precious metals or gems in the city of Brockton relative to regulated property licenses, inspections, record keeping, and regulations. Invited to attend, Winthrop Burrell Jr., Counselor at Large, Brenna Perez, Brockton Police Chief, or her designee.
Councilors, I filed this at the request of the police department and the police chief, and I'll turn it over to Sergeant Skinner to let you know how we're improving our handling of this particular topic in the city.
All right, so this ordinance is really, we're looking to modernize the existing ordinance. The majority of the existing ordinance was last updated in 1981,
Yeah.
with the exception of Section 11-43, which is last updated in 2015. The crux of the whole ordinance is really to have more accountability, to have more authority to audit the books of these particular companies, or I should say storefronts. It should come as no surprise that a lot of stolen goods end up in these particular pawn shops and the like, and this would give us the opportunity to expand our right for inspection. It will hopefully lead us to identify and recover more stolen goods. So it's really just an update to the existing ordinance that we have right now.
Councilors? Anyone?
I have a few things.
All right, Councilor Nacastro.
The title has a typo in it.
I did notice that. I was going to bring that to your attention.
Okay.
That should say dealers, and it is misspelled. That's right at the top.
Yes,
An ordinance replacing Chapter 11, Article 3, and dealers is spelled incorrectly.
yes. Did you got that, Attorney Resnick?
Yep.
Okay. And then at the bottom of the first page, Section 11-44B, it says the licensing authority of the city of Brockton. Well, in the case of this ordinance, traditionally, the city council is the licensing authority. And it does mention that in the existing ordinance. Shouldn't it say the city council? Or the licensing authority is the city council for purposes of this ordinance?
Yeah, if that's what it's supposed to be, then we can make that amendment as well.
Okay. Should we make a motion to amend now or wait?
Do you have any more?
46 PM.
No, I don't, but my,
Can I make a suggestion that you add licensing authority to the definition list? Licensing authority shall refer to the city council.
say that again?
To add
licensing
licensing
authority.
authority to the definition list,
Sure?
and we shall say, shall refer to the city council.
Sure? Perfect. So I'll make that motion?
A second?
Second.
Okay, all in favor?
I had one question on this, and maybe I'm misreading this. Have we always had a hearing on a second-hand license
Yeah, we do have hearings on those.
Yeah, we do that.
on a renewal?
No.
No,
No.
it usually just renews unless there's a problem.
Well, okay.
Through the point of information.
Go ahead, Councilman Allen.
It goes through the clerk's office for renewal. It can, at the discretion of the clerk or by request of a counselor, be withheld. But that might be more of a common courtesy. There was one that in my ward that Clerk Zioli held. There were some problems with the police. They'd found some stolen goods.
Yeah.
And it was only released after the police were comfortable that they had learned.
Thank you. All right, well, there's motion properly made and seconded on the amendments. All in favor? All opposed?
Okay.
The amendments are carried. Anything further?
I'm just looking, where is renewal dealt with in here?
Page 1 at the bottom. Issuance, renewal, and revocation.
Okay. Should we have a provision that directly reflects renewal?
I would say they've identified some pretty broad categories where you could deny a renewal.
Yeah.
So I think the police have incorporated what needs to be in here to make sure of the integrity of these dealers.
Okay.
So essentially, it would operate if the police department found that there was a dealer that's not in compliance, they would suggest to us at renewal time not to renew, bring them back before us to make a determination to renew. Okay.
You start finding stolen property at a particular place, that would be a red flag.
Okay.
If there's nothing else, someone could make a motion to favorably recommend as amended?
Motion to recommend favorably as amended.
Second.
Okay, if no further discussion, all in favor? All opposed? It is a vote.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you, Sergeant.
Item number 6, ordinance. An ordinance to adopt a sharps disposal plan in the city of Brockton. Invited to attend, Jeffrey Thompson, Ward 5 Counselor, Brenna Perez, Brockton Police Chief or her designee, Eno Monacer, Director of Board of Health, George DePino, Chief of Inspectional Services, Jasmine Bradshaw, Director of Social Services.
Mr. Chair, if I may?
Yes, Councilor Thompson, excuse me.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And again, good evening, Sergeant Skinner, and all invited guests. So this sharps disposal plan was brought forth to address some of the issues that the city is experiencing, and that's essentially, the plethora of sharps needles that we find throughout the city. After, discussions with both Brockton Police Department, Social Services, Inspectional Services, the Board of Health, we see that this Sharps disposal plan probably needs a little bit more work. We are going to engage in that additional work. But essentially, what we want to do is find a plan that addresses the issue that we're trying to solve. And, and that issue is, again, the disposal of needles throughout our city. And I think to even begin to address that problem, we need a better and clearer understanding of who is providing the needles to the people in the city, which one of these entities are engaged in the collection of needles, what is their disposal plan, are they recording how many they're distributing, how many they're collecting, how many they're disposing. So when this plan eventually comes before us for a vote, I think we're going to take this in a kind of a two-step process. The first step would be data collection. What we'd like to do as a city is identify who in the city, both retailers and distributors, who is distributing needles in our city. Some of these entities on the retail side, your CVS's, your Walgreens, they sell direct to consumer. We have other clinics, whether they be the Brockton Neighborhood Health Center, whether they be the Coke Center, whether they be any methadone clinic. I think what we need to do is better identify who is in the distribution game, let's call it, and and who is collecting, and what are their records in relation to that. I also think that the city of Brockton needs its own disposal plan, and that's something that I've been working with Dr. Montesier and ISD and our legislative council, is for the city to develop its own disposal plan, and then make sure that we, in that plan, we're in compliance with the CMRs, but that we have a plan that's cost effective, from speaking with Dr. Montesier, we found that, I believe, as last year, we went beyond our budget for needle disposal because we found that people were disposing needles into our Sharps container at the recycling center, and we just weren't prepared for that level of disposal at the in our Sharps containers. So we have to be aware of that and make additional options for Sharps disposal. And I just want to mention one thing is I did receive the letter from the Brockton Neighborhood Health Center, and I thought in that letter, they really brought up some good suggestions that not only should we be, having our own policy on Sharps and try to understand the different policies of those who distribute, but to maybe further incentivize the collection of Sharps, kind of do it on the idea of how we do cans, right? Recyclable cans and bottles, maybe put some sort of payment plan, a return plan where we would give 5 or 10 cents per needle that's turned in. So that's a great idea. I support that idea, and I think that would actually, really address, or at least, significantly address the issue that we're trying to solve here. So it doesn't all necessarily have to be take a hammer to everyone. What I'd really like to do is incentivize people to have the best procedures possible to accept Sharps and dispose of Sharps so that we can accomplish the overall goal of removing as many needles from our community that we find on the ground as possible. So I'm going to invite the other speakers to come to speak about what we're trying to accomplish here, what they've been tasked to try to get done, but at the end of it, I'd be seeking a motion to postpone so that we can keep working on this matter. So, Sergeant Skinner, you have the microphone and you have the floor, sir.
Well, we spoke earlier today. You spoke about all this earlier, and the BPD supports this path forward, and we're willing to work with any partners to make this better.
Dr. Monasterio, if you could come forward. I know we have, we've tasked you with putting together our internal policy on sharps disposal. And so maybe if you could just inform the committee where we are in the progress of putting that plan together, and then maybe talk about some of the costs related with the disposal of sharps that the city's incurring.
Yeah, I share this with you.
Yeah, please come on forward. I know earlier today, I don't know if you received it, but Dr. Monasterio did send us an email kind of outlining some of these issues.
If Jasmine wants to come up and sit next to Dr. Monasterio, come on up.
Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. Good evening, Council, and thank you, Councilor Thompson, for bringing me here this evening. Sharp disposal is a major undertaking for the city because we do have people who use, and they will continue to use. And so, therefore, it is incumbent upon us to see how to address the issues so that we can find a better way to help dispose of the syringes and to keep the city clean and prevent other people from being exposed to those syringes that might be infected. By the way, we do have increase in HIV infection, and this is one of the means that where people get infected. In other words, when they use syringes and perhaps they share syringes to use drugs, that becomes a transmission mode for HIV as well. And so it is in the interest of the city to make sure that we find ways to mitigate the situation. So what I propose here is looking at an MOU that the city has with Brockton Neighborhood Health Center and BMZ, which is a program that services people in the city who use. And so, therefore, this program has two arms, or it provides two incentives. One, it provides people free syringes so that they don't have to buy it or use dirty needles. Number two, that program also take back dirty syringes. And if that was the only program in the city that was providing syringes, and the people who were using them would adhere to it, probably we would not have the situation that we observe with needles all over the place. So I remember, even though I did not serve with late Mayor Carpenter, but he did have a plan where he did allow one-to-one exchange needle. But this plan that we did approve under an MOU with those two entities did not really look at that same plan. And I think there were some reasons for that also, whereby they would not just give one-to-one, but they would give as much syringes to the users. And so those are two incentives, but I was looking at existing plans, and Councilor Thompson has already mentioned, and in the plan that Brockton Neighborhood suggested also, there is that incentive. Boston used it as well. It seemed that it has worked very effectively until somehow they ran out of resources as of last July. I don't know exactly if they're working to allocate other resources, but I think that's a good way to provide a direct incentive to the individuals, not to any other entities, but they would bring those syringes in some locations, and they would receive either 5 cents or 10 cents per dirty syringe, and then that way we would have them. So With respect to locations, we do have one location where we drop our needles, and that is at the Oak Hill at the Department of Public Works. That's where they drop them. So I think in the plan that we would envision moving forward, it would be ideal to have different locations throughout the city to allow people to be able to drop them there. And I think it would be in our best interest to identify those locations and see how feasible it is to drop them there. And that could be the police, the fire department, the ambulance place also, even though we don't have that many ambulance places, but I know we have a few locations in town. So, and perhaps also City Hall could be a place, some locations where they could also drop those needles. Budget-wise, it did cost the city, the health department, few thousands to pay to take them over there from over there to drop them at final locations where they get rid of them. So it would be a budget issue as well for us. I'll stop here and take questions.
Yasmin, anything?
So I just put together some information, just so the council had an idea of what specifically we're seeing when we're doing outreach to the encampments, or we're getting emails, phone calls, see-click fixes. I went through the emails from the last, I'd say, 3 or 4 months, and we've had 42 different locations reported for needles that I was able to actually find in writing. And that doesn't include the phone calls we get. And a lot of times it's the same places. I had previously put together a list of places that could be called to pick up needles. That includes Brewster Ambulance Company through the fire alarm number, the Cope Center, Brockton Neighborhood Health Center, and then our office. I am trained to clean them up as well. So when we go out, if I see them, I do remove them. I get the containers that I use either from the Board of Health or the Department of Public Works, but they can take a long time for them to get new ones in because of funding. The past 6 months, I've cleaned up over 5,000 needles from the different locations that we've gone to. I keep track of that just for the purposes of an idea of what we're bringing back to the DPW. We've discussed putting receptacles, like the large receptacles that people could return containers to, in different places using the opioid settlement funds. This isn't something we've been able to follow through on yet, as we're just making sure that we have the exact financial number of funding that we have from that program and the steps needed for like reporting back to the state to move forward. But that is an option we had looked at, and we have gone over the idea of a syringe buyback program multiple times. But there's a lot of things that went into that, like who was going to be in control of that, how are we going to decide what we give per syringe that was returned, again, how we dispose of those, who's actually counting to confirm if that is a correct number. Because the boxes, a lot of people put other things in the boxes when they return them. So it's hard to say exactly how much is in there, what's in there, and they are obviously incinerated, so it does mitigate a lot of the safety concerns with that, but we also have to be mindful of the funding and the reporting when we go back, so it's been a lot of like minute details trying to figure that out and what that would look like. Currently, the list we give out, we also have business cards. The business card specifically gives the fire alarm number for Brewster Ambulance, because Brewster comes out within 15 minutes and will clean them up for us. And they've been great as far as their response for that. We cleaned up a site that had 2 abandoned tents the other day, and when they reported back to us, there's over 400 needles just at that one spot, and it was on school property. So there's been a lot of concern with that as well, and how we're going to address things like that when they do pop up on school property, not just the tents, but the activity that takes place with the syringes. We get, I would say I've gotten over 30 phone calls within the last couple of weeks about 2 different schools that had tents, and parents being very upset about how to address it, what we were going to do going forward, how to mitigate the needles that were being found. There's just a lot that's going to go into the thought process, and we had a really good meeting discussing this the other day. I'm just not sure how to reinforce getting people to actually put the syringes in the containers, because they are provided to them when they go to the harm reduction centers. They don't always make it in there. And then you'll also find a pack of 10 needles, and one will be missing, but the rest have been unused. And a lot of times, we're throwing away perfectly clean needles that haven't been touched, they haven't been used, they haven't even been opened. So there's just a lot of details that are going to go into how to address this and how to actually entice people into returning them. And I'm just not sure what that's going to look like. We have ideas, but things we've tried haven't really seemed to make a huge impact on how many are actually returned. We had metal boxes bolted to the fence in the back of Perkins Park that had padlocks on them. They were chained at one point. They have since been broken open. I took a picture this week of one. The metal itself has been bent to get the boxes out, and then people are reusing the needles. So we also have a concern for the spread of HIV, hepatitis, and other bloodborne illnesses. And then that again goes back to when people are cleaning them up. DPW is not supposed to be picking them up for safety concerns, but it's really hard for them to clean an area if there are needles around and then just leave them, because they don't want other people to be exposed to them either. So there's a lot that I think could be added to this ordinance and change that I think would make it much stronger, like Councilor Thompson had mentioned, and ways to improve upon the practices the city has as a whole, as well as working with the agencies in the city to increase the actual, like picking up and returning of the needles, because I think that's where the problem is. It's not so much having the receptacles, because those are there. It's how do we get them back from people? How do we entice people to bring them back? And then what's the best method moving forward when we do get people calling to get them cleaned up as quickly as possible?
A couple of questions for you. Why can't the people who are distributing the needles have a list so that if someone comes in, Jasmine B, and not to give out HIPAA information, Jasmine B was given 3 needles on a particular day. The next time you come in, if you don't turn in 3 needles, wouldn't that be a rudimentary but some type of a system to hold people accountable for turning them in?
So I know that, so I did previously work at the Cope Center, so I know at least when I was there, the system they used was they would document that, and it was through client coding, and it was a specific way that they got information, were able to track that information. And usually it would be like, brought in 5 needles, were given however many. DPH has a recommendation of however many needles they give. I'm not exactly sure what the number is now, but I do know previously at one point it was 10 per day, because the average person using heroin was using at least 5 or 6 times. They wanted to make sure they had extra just in case. And since then, fentanyl has a different half-life, so they're using more often to maintain so they don't go into withdrawal. So the number for that is much higher. So there is not an exact 1-for-1, so that part's a little iffy there. And a lot of people question why it isn't kind of like an exact, and they don't want people to come in and not have anything to return if they did in fact lose them and then leave without anything and possibly reuse someone's needle that might cause an issue, because the needles can also break off under the skin and then cause a ton of different health concerns.
And I do understand that, but on the other hand, we do have a health issue with people walking their dog, kids in a field, stepping on a needle. And I do think we should do something. Don't mistake what I'm about to say, but I just find it hard to believe that the average person that shoots up with a drug is going to have the presence of mind that I need to properly dispose of this needle. Because I'm going to tell you a true story. It's a little bit odd, but I had a terrible gallbladder attack, had to have my gallbladder out. I got rushed to the hospital, and they came in and I was in such pain, they gave me Dilaudid. And I can tell you I was floating. When I tell you I was floating on that, above that stretcher, I had no idea what was going on. I didn't know where I was. All I knew was this was the best I ever felt in my life. And if I had had a needle and did that to myself, I'm not going to worry about where I threw the needle. I'm probably going to live in the moment for as long as it lasted. And so whatever we do, I don't want to raise the expectations of the public that we're still not going to have a needle disposal issue. I mean, I really think we still are. To the extent we can mitigate it, absolutely. I have no problem with that in a reasonable way, but it's probably not going to go away, colleagues. It's going to be with us, and we just have to maybe examine what other communities have done and try to adopt what they've done if it's made a difference, and do what we can here. And I like Councilor Thompson's suggestion. Let's do some more data collection. Let's consult some of the experts, and let's put together something that will be as successful as possible, even though it's not going to be perfect. Well,
I agree, and this is the beginning of that discussion, and it's one that's going to continue to ultimately address, a problem that we all recognize, and we really want to try to provide as many solutions to that problem as possible. So thank you, Jasmine, for being here. You as well, Dr. Montesor, Mr. DePina, thank you for working with me, and we're going to continue this work and hopefully get something in front of the City Council within the next few months to,
the first couple of weeks in January, I'd like to have another ordinance meeting on not only the fairgrounds, but this issue. So if we postpone it to the next ordinance meeting, it will be fairly soon.
Okay, we can, I'll make a motion to postpone to the next ordinance committee, and if we don't really, if we haven't really advanced the ball too much, then maybe we can just postpone it again, or maybe not put it on for that meeting. But we're gonna hold more meetings and try to bring in more stakeholders and get something good for the city of Brockton.
Councilor DeCastro?
I'll make a second on it, and then on the motion, I wanted to say, just today, I had an email from a woman who walks her dog on Summer Street and sees a pile of needles. And she didn't get much help. She called the police. She relates that she called the police, she called the fire station. We'll get to it when we can. And, she doesn't want her dog to get nicked, but also it's near a bus stop and so on and so forth. It's happening everywhere. You know that better than all of us. What do you think of this ordinance as drafted? How can we improve it?
So when we had our meeting the other day, the recommendations that I had made to just what is physically written, and then we further went into discussions on how to make some edits. The way it's written right now, it would require any retailer or distributor of syringes within the city to follow certain steps. And I don't think a lot of pharmacies are going to want to adhere to some of the things that are written here. So for example, they would have to provide 2 receptacles within the city, type and size to be determined by the Board of Health.
Right.
A lot of pharmacies are not required to take back needles, even though they sell them.
Right.
Same as most doctors' offices in neither hospital. They don't take them back. And that's the thing. So there's few places that you can actually physically return them to, which is the concern. But I don't know if these types of places would follow through on that, because then they would have to create a contract with a company to then come and empty the receptacles every so often and whatnot. And so I think we would get a lot of pushback in that capacity. But I do know that if they're providing them in large amounts, it would be helpful to have somewhere where people could at least bring them. Or we get phone calls a lot where people are like, I don't know where to bring my needles. And that's people that, it's not just substance use, it's diabetes, it's cancer trials that people are doing. People need somewhere to bring them, and when your own doctor won't take them back, sometimes they just sit around or people throw them out, and that's another issue too, because then they're getting thrown into the trash, and DPW and refuse are being exposed to anything that might be happening in that situation.
It's also against state law to throw them out since 2012.
So there were some concerns there that I'm just not sure if people will necessarily comply right away, and what it would take to get them to comply with that or be willing to change some of the policies that they have. And I know that a lot of our pharmacies right now have trouble getting staffing anyway, so their hours are cut back. So then adding new tasks onto their job might kind of deter people from wanting to be there in the first place.
It's kind of amazing. They're making more money than God on all those different prescriptions that they fill, and yet they've cut their staffs down and they've cut the hours down.
Yeah, and then it mentions having receptacles placed throughout the city, and our receptacles are metal, and they've been broken. So my question was, who's then liable to fix those?
Right.
If we require them to put them somewhere, and the company only comes once a week, if in the meantime it's been broken, are they then required to fix it, or is the city required to fix it for them because we had them put them out there? And what would the cost of that look like if it is something that the city has to incur cost-wise to fix? I do think the idea of getting the internal policies from all the agencies is good, just to have a better idea of exactly what they look like as far as their disposals, what companies they're using, the numbers they're giving out versus the numbers they're collecting, or, challenges that they're seeing, because I know they have the same issue. Brockton Neighborhood Health Center had mentioned it's hard for them to get the information about the needles and where they're located to pick them up, because our first call is Brewster. That is who we work with to call, and that's also who we know will be there right away. So that is our chain of command. That's what we do on our behalf. And it's frustrating for them because they feel like people blame them then when stuff is left on the street and it's not necessarily being picked up. And it's the places that hand them out that people tend to put the blame on. So I think there's just a lot of ways that we could change this to also incorporate kind of the necessity of the physical cleanup, because I feel like that's the real problem. Not the idea of having somewhere to put them, but who is also cleaning them up, because we know not everyone's going to return them. We see it every day. So how do we add in a component that will ensure they're cleaned up in a more timely manner, that we have more options of who can clean them up, things like that. So.
And I don't think the ordinance addressed that. Who empties the container?
Right, right.
Right.
Excellent.
Thank you. That's a great start. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
You're welcome.
Oh, one other thing. We received a letter from a vice president of a trade organization, Retailers Association of Massachusetts. Understandably, he's speaking for pharmacies and drugstores, CVS and the like, saying you can't put the responsibility on them. It would be dangerous to carry used syringes into a retail store and throw them away. Potential legal exposure and liability for a retail pharmacy is too great. I mean, he takes the position that, of course, you would expect him to take. He says the foundation of any successful product stewardship program is a plan to hold the manufacturer primarily responsible. Now, what's the likelihood of that happening under the circumstances we're discussing?
So we had mentioned that. What's the possibility? So Amazon ships out boxes of 100 needles for less than $20. So you could get that from Amazon. It would come to your house within a day or so. But how do you hold Amazon responsible for having a syringe collection receptacle within the city when technically you don't know exactly which manufacturer it came from? It just came from Amazon as a whole.
Right.
You would then have to trace all that back.
Right.
And I do understand the idea of the staff in CVS maybe specifically isn't trained on how to deal with someone who is bringing used syringes back.
Right.
But they do provide them.
Yeah.
So it's like they do have a sense of how to give them to people, how to safely kind of maneuver that situation. If it's just a box that you're just putting your used syringes that's already in a container in, there's not a whole lot of hand-to-hand back and forth that's actually happening, because you could tell someone, just go put them there. Or if they have loose ones, you could have a container, please put them in that container. So while I understand the idea of the staff maybe not being trained to do it, there are ways around that. But that's the pushback. Are they willing to actually work with us on something like that?
Right, and whose job is this? That's right. Thank you. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
And just on that issue, I actually called this gentleman, the one that sent this to us.
Oh, yeah?
I had a nice conversation with him. He explained his concerns. I talked to him about, this not being a fully complete product, and that we're going to work to, take in consideration his concerns. And he was actually asking to be a resource for us for contact with the pharmacies in Brockton. He doesn't just represent Walgreens and CVS, but some of the smaller pharmacies as well. And so he was willing to give us contact information so that we can, move into that data collection issue that we discussed.
Very good.
But
All right, anything else?
No.
I think we have a motion to postpone to the next ordinance meeting.
Yes.
There's no further discussion. All those in favor? All those opposed? It is a vote. To all of you still here, Merry Christmas, Happy Holidays, if we don't see you between now and Christmas or the New Year, and thank you for being here.
Thank you for all your
Yeah,
help.
thank you all.
This is a little bit longer than we usually go, but I think the issues were important, and the
Great.
discussion is beneficial.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and Merry Christmas.
Well,
I
thank
do
you,
not-
Mr. Chair. Thank you, everyone. We'll be back next year because there is plenty of work to do.
Right.
There you go.
Motion adjourned.
Second.
All right, motion made to adjourn, motion made and seconded to adjourn. All those in favor, all those opposed? It is a vote.
We adjourned at 9:22.